Wow, am I happy to be making this video today. Finally, we have the Porsche 911 GT3R in iRacing. Now here's a video going into what I feel about the car, where it's close, where it could use some help, how it compares to what my previous favorite car is, the Cup car, and just what makes this absolute monster such a joy to drive. Now, what is the 991.2 911 GT3R? Well, at the end of the day, what we're looking at here is a Cup car with yes said to every optional add-on you could ever even think of. More aero, more tire, more mechanical grip, more adjustability, more electronics, everything that you could want in a GT race car. Now, after doing my first couple laps on the members build with the new 911 GT3R, I can finally say just how good of a vehicle this currently is and where the tire model has it. Now, of course there are some things that we can adjust with it down the line, but I am extremely pleased at where this car comes into compared to its real life counterpart. Now, as we know, with the current iRacing tire model system having bespoke tire models for each car, we have to compare this to the other GT3s and come up with a BOP at the end of the day. That all being said, I do feel the tire model on this current GT3R pushes us even closer to what we're looking for in terms of realism and predictability with the car's behavior. Now, one of my favorite areas of work with this car has to be with the ABS and the brakes, using these lights on the sides of the dash to really go and approach the realism that we want when it comes to braking and trail braking and adjustability with the ABS system. And I think that is something we have really unlocked with this current car. Now, before we get into the intricacies of driving the GT3R, let's take a look at its little brother, the 911 Cup car. What are similar and what are different between these two vehicles? Now, a lot of people would call the 911 Cup car one of the hardest cars to drive on iRacing, and frankly, I would agree with that statement. Having extremely similar power and similar weight, but much less aerodynamic and mechanical grip to the GT3R, it creates a car that is uneasy, especially on the current iRacing tire model. Even though the current tire model does have me mentally working as hard as I am in the real car, the time in transition between lateral loads is just not there compared to the real thing. And that is something that is less of the case with the GT3R. Having more aerodynamic grip, more mechanical grip, and more technology to help the tire drive into the corner hard, we get a closer sense to realism and amount of commitment it takes to drive the car deep into a corner. Now, with all of that being said, we are still dealing with a Porsche 911 here, and the engine is still at the back of the car, and physics is still physics. All of that means one does still have to have incredible throttle discipline to maximize this car's potential. That includes a nice trail brake and coast down to the apex, and a very aggressive throttle application from apex out of the corner, maximizing the weight distribution and allowing that engine to really squat that back tire down into the ground. Now, let's go take it to two of my favorite tracks and discover other little intricacies that this 911 GT3R has that compares to the real life counterpart. Now here we are at Circuit Zolder in Belgium to take it for a hot lap, see how it handles the bumps and the slow corners around this track. As you come in on a hard initial brake, using the ABS, you quickly trail it off and let that front end dive down into the corner. And the car really does feel good over the bumps. I think that is somewhere this new tire model has really strived to focus with this car. You can see probably a little bit of an issue putting power down, but that could be all changed with setup. These are some of the early laps I did with the car. Now as we dive into a fast corner, you can see you just lay on that front end and just let it bite. I got a little eager to get back to throttle, which pushed me a little wide, not following my own advice. Now as we come into the chicane here, you see it's a hard brake, maximizing that ABS, rolling it off, and then getting after the curb. Now there's a key feature at that curb exit that I'm going to highlight later on in this video. We come diving into the slow corners. Again, we get hard on the brake, dive it down in, and allow a little bit of steering angle, but once we're off the ABS, really let that car churn. A little couple throttle pumps to get the car to rotate, and then flat out over the hill here. Now as we dive into the hairpin, we really get after the brakes once again and get the car to turn mid-corner and use the other maximum part of the 911 is that corner exit. That back wheel squats, the front wheel bounces, it bites, and away you go. As we dive into the last chicanes here, again, you really load the front end of the car, keep it loaded all the way down into apex, a little squirted throttle release to get that front end to bite, then back to hard power, touch of traction control, and back we are onto the front straight. Now, to highlight some of my favorite things about driving this car in iRacing, really have to come down to three key parts. First, the ABS lights, or lockup lights in this case. Now, the fact that the car has lockup lights may seem kind of strange because it has ABS, but these become an amazing tool for tuning your ABS settings and your brake bias. By having the purple lights show the front lockup and yellow lights show in the rear, you're able to effectively see your brake bias on the fly and make adjustments accordingly to try to balance those lights out, as well as see how much overall tire you're locking up due to how much lights are coming on. Now for example, in this brake zone, I don't really have too much light, but that doesn't mean I'm not out of the ABS, it just means I'm not having too much lockup. Maybe I could turn the ABS down a touch and get a little more lockup and get the tire to bite. All in all, it's a fantastic way of seeing just what your braking capabilities are at any time. Another trait that iRacing have nailed with this car is how the front end feels over bumps. Now, we don't have an engine up front, so the front's going to have a little bit more of a springiness to it, as we could see here on the exit of the chicane at Zolder. The way the front end just hops that little bit more than the rear there, takes a second to bite, but the back end stays on the ground, is damn near real world perfection there. The other area I like is just how smooth it is when you roll up onto a curb like you see there at Spa. Just roll up onto the top of it, it rolls off with no drama. Now while we are here at Spa, we might as well talk about some setup while we're at it. So where do I go to adjust this car for my driving style? Well, my biggest thing with the 911 is always the front end. If I can get a nice wide base, some wide shoulders, a really stable front end on the car, it gives me confidence in attacking the corner entry hard all the way down to apex. So for that reason, my normal first adjustment with this car is anti-roll bar. I normally end up going a bit stiff on the anti-roll bar to give myself a lot of support on the way into the corner, and it actually keeps a bit more weight on that inside rear tire, and that is the cause of entry oversteer. Is if the front end's a bit too soft, you're taking all the weight off that inside rear tire, and that's going to allow the back of the car to break away. So if you're ever feeling the car is a bit nervous on entry of the corner, it might not just be an adjustment of the rear wing, but it could be worth stiffening up that front end and giving yourself some more support. Now to go to the back of the car for an adjustment area, one area that I really tend to focus on early on in setup building is diff preload. And running a lower amount than would typically be seen in these setups to really help the car have a stable balance throughout the corner. By increasing the diff preload, you're adding in understeer off throttle and adding in oversteer on throttle, something I'm not quite a fan of on the 911s. So that's an area that I normally run in the low double digits to really help the car keep a neutral balance both on and off throttle. Now beyond that, this car really likes to play around with rake. That while the 911 Cup car had rake being one of its core adjustments, it's even more so in this case because of the aerodynamics at play. You're now dealing with a front splitter and a front diffuser, so you're trying to maximize those for maximum airflow and playing with the weight around just to see what sticks at each track. So between the front anti-roll bar, the rear diff preload, and rake, you're able to really get some good areas of adjustment. Beyond that, this car also has full shock adjustability, not something that's there in the Cup car. Now, finding the correct shock settings is a bit of a dark art in iRacing, as the real numbers might not quite line up perfectly, but this is an area where some experimentation could show some benefit to the average user. We've already discussed the brakes and how easy it is to tune the ABS and bias settings, so that's something that I've really found to be an easy nail in this car. But I've always found that if I can get that front end stable and then play with similar adjustments on the back of the car for corner exit, I can really get the thing to squat and go hard out of a corner, but also have a lot of stability on the way in and carry momentum all the way through the corner. And so with that, those are my first initial thoughts on the 911 Cup car as it's released on Novembers, the areas I like to play around with it, and just how it compares to the Cup car. Now, I'm not normally a GT3 guy, but I think this car is going to change that, and I'm going to end up doing more than a few laps in GT3 cars in the year to come.